You know, sometimes, amidst all the noise, all the rush that is my life, when the lights go out and silence finally falls, but my mind is still racing a mile a minute, my mind drifts to specific moments, tiny instants that feel almost unreal in their quietness, their normalcy, islands of calm in an ocean of expectations. And almost always, invariably, when I search for that feeling of genuine calm, of a connection that didn't need words, a connection that simply was, I return to the same place, to that gray afternoon, in that almost sacred silence of high shelves and the smell of old paper. I go back to the day I met you. Do you remember? Maybe for you, it was just another ordinary day, a small, forgotten gesture among many others, a casual act of kindness. But for me, it was like finding a perfect musical note in the middle of a cacophony. It was as if the world, for an instant, held its breath along with me. I was tired, and it wasn't just physical exhaustion, the kind that weighs on your muscles after endless hours of rehearsal, or settles into your bones after a flight that's too long, crossing time zones. No, it was a different kind of weariness, deeper, more insidious. A soul weariness, perhaps. A weariness from the constant attention, the blinding flashes, the silent expectations that seem to hang in the air around me like a thick fog. I love what I do. I love our fans with an intensity that sometimes scares me. I love music more than words can express. But there are days when the weight of being Jungkook feels too heavy, like a second skin I can't shed, no matter how hard I try. On those days, I feel an almost desperate need for invisibility, for a moment, a single moment, where I could just be Jungkook, some random guy, lost in his own thoughts, observing the world without being the center of attention. That particular week, the pressure seemed to have ramped up exponentially. We were on the verge of a major release, and the promotional machine was in full swing, interviews that seemed to repeat in an endless loop, photo shoots, where every angle was meticulously analyzed, strategy meetings that dragged on for hours. The schedule was so packed, it barely let me breathe, barely let me process one event, before being thrown into the next. I felt disconnected, like I was watching my own life from the outside, a passive spectator in my own show. I'd smile for the cameras, answer questions on autopilot, but inside, I felt a growing emptiness, a sense of floating, unanchored. I needed a breather, urgently. I needed a place where the outside world couldn't reach me so easily, where the constant hum of expectations would dissolve. I needed silence, real silence, not just the absence of sound, but the absence of demand. And that's why I decided to go to that library. It wasn't the closest one to the studio or the dorm, nor the most modern with its computer terminals and clean design. It was an old library, a bit removed from the center, hidden on a quieter street, the kind with wooden floors that creak with every step, huge arched windows letting light filter in almost dramatically, strained through the dust of years, and that unmistakable smell of old paper, glue, and history. A place that seemed to exist outside of time, outside the frantic rhythm of the city outside. I'd been there a few times before, always disguised, of course, cap pulled down low, almost covering my eyes, black mask covering half my face, loose, discreet clothes, usually dark. I'd never been recognized there. It was my little secret sanctuary of normalcy, my anonymous refuge. That day, besides the need for escape, I had a specific mission, which made the getaway feel even more justified in my head, a purpose beyond the simple desire to hide. A photographer I deeply admire, a master at capturing the soul of cities in black and white, mentioned in an old interview a specific book, a rare collection of early 20th century urban landscape photographs. He described the book not just as a collection of images, but as an experience, saying it had a unique sensibility, a way of capturing the loneliness and raw beauty of the city that had profoundly inspired him early in his career. I, who always carry my camera everywhere and seek visual inspiration in everything, became obsessed with the idea of finding that book. It was more than just curiosity. It was a quest for something that might reconnect me with myself, with my own way of seeing the world, with the art that also moved me silently. Maybe there, in those old pages, I'd find an echo of my own feelings, a validation of the beauty I saw in urban melancholy. So, there I was, pushing open the heavy wooden door of the library, feeling its weight like a symbolic transition. The muffled sound of the street was instantly replaced by the respectful, almost reverent silence of the place. The air was cool, but not cold, heavy with that familiar scent of paper, dust, and time. I took a deep breath, feeling my lungs fill with it, as if inhaling calm. Few people moved through the labyrinthine corridors of tall shelves. Some students bent over their books at reading tables, immersed in their own worlds. An elderly man with white hair, reading a newspaper near one of the large windows, taking advantage of the natural light. The librarian at the front desk, behind a mountain of books waiting to be cataloged, barely glanced up when I entered, giving me a minimal, almost imperceptible nod before returning to her work. Perfect. Here, I wasn't an idol, wasn't a public figure. Here, I was just another shadow searching the shelves, an anonymous shape in this temple of silence. I knew which section to look for, visual arts, and within that, photography. I walked through the aisles, my footsteps echoing softly on the old wood, each creak a small reminder of the place's age. The light filtering through the high windows created geometric patterns on the floor, luminous bands that moved slowly as time passed, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air like tiny daytime fireflies, visible only against the light. There was a calm there that was almost palpable, a stillness that seemed to absorb all noise, external and internal. The only sounds were the occasional turning of a page somewhere distant, a muffled cough from another aisle, the distant, almost rhythmic click of a keyboard being used by some diligent student. It was a symphony of silence, and I let myself be absorbed by it, feeling the tension built up in my shoulders and neck begin to lessen, slowly dissolving in that tranquil atmosphere. The photography shelves were particularly tall, taller than the others, as if guarding greater secrets. They were imposing, filled with books of all sizes and thicknesses, a mosaic of colorful and somber spines. I ran my fingers along the spines, feeling the texture of paper, leather, cloth beneath my fingertips. I read the titles in a low voice, almost an inaudible whisper. Masters of Photography, Art History, Developing Techniques. There was a sense of discovery in every aisle, as if treasures were hidden there, waiting to be found by curious eyes. I allowed myself to forget for a moment who I was outside, what my schedule was for the next day, what expectations weighed on me. There, in that moment, I became just an explorer in that universe of knowledge and art, a solitary seeker. Maybe I would find more than just the book. Maybe I'd find a piece of myself there. It took me a considerable amount of time to find the right, more specific section. Early 20th century European historical photography. I had a few false leads, books with similar titles, others from the same period, but not that one. With every aisle I turned down, a small spark of hope would rise, followed by mild disappointment. But the search itself was therapeutic, keeping me focused on the present, on the physical act of looking, reading spines, sensing the environment. And then, finally, after almost 20 minutes searching among the shelves, I saw it, unmistakable, even from a distance. The dark leather spine, a bit worn at the edges from time and handling, with the title embossed in gold letters that were almost faded but still legible if you got close. It was it, the book I had been looking for so hard. My heart gave a small leap of genuine satisfaction, that simple, pure pleasure of finding what you seek after an effort. A small personal victory on that tiring day. There was just one problem. A problem of a good foot or so, I'd say. It was on the highest shelf, right at the very top, almost touching the ceiling of that section. I looked up, tilting my head back, assessing the height. It was really high, higher than it had initially seemed. I chuckled quietly to myself, a sound lost in the library silence, imagining the scene. Me, Jungkook, here, disguised with a cap and mask, looking like some cartoon character trying to reach something unattainable. I glanced quickly to the sides, making sure no one was nearby to witness my likely clumsiness. The aisle was empty. I took a deep breath, concentrating. Okay, here we go, no drama. I stood on tiptoe, stretching my right arm as high as I could, feeling the muscles in my calf and back pull taut. My fingers brushed against the book's rough spine. I felt the texture of the old leather, but I couldn't get a firm enough grip to pull it out without the risk of knocking down other books or making a scandalous amount of noise. I tried again, stretching even further, almost jumping slightly, leaning dangerously forward, feeling slightly off balance. Part of me, the practical part, told me to look for one of those library step stools, but the other part, the proud and perhaps slightly stubborn part, wanted to manage it alone, wanted this small challenge to be overcome without outside help. Besides, asking for help would mean interacting, maybe being recognized, and I desperately wanted to avoid that. Here I was, capable of executing complex choreographies demanding strength and pinpoint precision on stage in front of thousands. But here, in this silent aisle, I was unable to reach a simple book on a high shelf. I felt my face flush slightly under the mask, an annoying mix of frustration and a certain embarrassment, even though I was practically alone. It was ridiculous. I was about to swallow my pride and look for that step stool, or maybe worst case, walk to the front desk and ask the librarian for help, which would surely shatter my cocoon of anonymity and expose me to unwanted conversation, when I sensed a subtle presence to my right, almost behind me. It wasn't the sound of footsteps, not a touch, not even a shadow I saw out of the corner of my eye. It was just a feeling. As if the air had shifted gently, as if the stillness of the aisle had been momentarily disturbed by something other than my own clumsy presence. I held my breath for an instant, my body tensing slightly, waiting. And then, it happened. Quick, efficient, and silent. From my right side, slightly behind me, an arm reached up, a slender arm, wearing the sleeve of a neutral-colored sweater, maybe light gray or beige, with delicate fingers that reached the top shelf with surprising ease, almost annoyingly so, compared to my struggle, without apparent effort, without hesitation. Her fingers gripped the thick spine of the book I had been struggling to reach moments before. The way you held it, firmly but carefully, showed a respect for the object. I stood frozen, completely caught off guard. My first reaction was almost a jolt, the adrenaline of being discovered or interrupted mid-struggle. But there was nothing threatening about the movement. It was calm, precise, almost as if you were just getting a book for yourself, and it happened to be the one I wanted. There was no fuss, no comment about my height or difficulty. The book came down smoothly, following the arc of your arm, and then, there it was, hovering for an instant in the space between us, before being offered to me, held securely in your hands. That's when I finally turned completely and really saw you for the first time. You were standing there, holding the heavy book with both hands, like an offering, presenting it to me. You were quiet, not just in the sound you made, or rather, the lack of it, but in your whole presence. There was a calmness about you that was almost palpable, a serene center of gravity that contrasted sharply with my own slight inner turmoil and earlier frustration. Your eyes met mine for a brief moment over my mask. I couldn't quite decipher your expression. Was there curiosity, perhaps? A hint of amusement? But above all, there was a kindness there, a silent understanding of my pathetic little struggle with the shell. And then, you smiled. It wasn't a wide, open smile, not the smile of someone recognizing someone famous and getting flustered or excited. It was a small, almost shy smile, contained at the lips, but it reached your eyes, making them sparkle slightly, a smile of incredible, shared understanding. As if we shared a little secret in that silent aisle. I saw you trying. Don't worry, it happens. It was a smile that asked for nothing in return, didn't expect an over-the-top reaction, just offered the book and a moment of shared, simple, human understanding. I was speechless for a second, maybe two. The world seemed to shift into slow motion. All the weariness I'd been feeling, all the frustration with the shelf, the whole sense of being out of place in my own world, seemed to evaporate in that instant. There, in that quiet aisle, under the soft light filtering through the distant window, that small, anonymous gesture, that understated smile, felt like the most significant, most real thing that had happened to me in days. The thank you, I finally managed to stammer, my voice coming out a bit hoarse and muffled under the mask. I reached out and took the book. Our fingers almost brushed in the exchange. I felt a strange warmth in that barely there contact, a subtle electricity in the air, a sudden awareness of your physical closeness. The book was heavy, substantial. You just nodded, the smile still playing faintly on your lips. Your eyes met mine again, and in the second glance, which lasted maybe a fraction longer than the first, I felt like I saw something more, a quiet intelligence, a serene depth that intrigued me instantly. There was a self-assuredness in your calm, and most importantly, there was no idle worship, no shock of recognition in your gaze. If there was any recognition, you disguised it with impressive mastery. It seemed that, to you, I was just some guy who needed help reaching a book in a library, and that normality, that lack of overreaction, was exactly what my heart desperately craved that day. It was an unexpected gift. And just as quickly and silently as you appeared, you took a step back, breaking the small force field that had formed between us. You turned with a natural fluidity and continued on your way down the aisle, your steps nearly soundless on the old wood, disappearing behind a tall shelf without a backward glance. No fuss, no prolonging the moment, no waiting for anything more. You just left, leaving behind only the echo of your kindness. I stood there for a long moment, alone again in the aisle, holding the heavy book against my chest. The old leather felt warm beneath my fingers, as if it had absorbed some of the heat from that unexpected encounter. The silence of the aisle seemed to return, but something fundamental had shifted. That space, previously just a functional refuge, now felt charged with the memory of your fleeting yet significant presence. The smell of the book seemed richer, sweeter. The golden light filtering through the distant window seemed to have gained a special glow. I looked in the direction you had gone, toward the shelf you disappeared behind. Part of me, the impulsive, curious part, wanted to follow. Thank you again, more articulately. Ask your name, ask what book you were looking for, break the silent spell with the banality of words. But another part, a more intuitive and perhaps wiser part, knew that the beauty of that moment lay precisely in its simplicity, its quietness, its lack of need for explanation or continuation. Your gesture had been so respectful of the surroundings, so discreet, so perfectly contained, it felt wrong, almost a desecration, to shatter it with clumsy words or my real identity. I took another deep breath, the scent of the old book filling my lungs. It was heavy, full of history, exactly as I'd hoped, but in that moment, the content of the pages felt almost secondary. The real treasure I had found in that library wasn't made of paper and ink. It was made of a glance, a smile, a silent gesture. With the book finally in my hands, a trophy won, not by my strength, but by your kindness, I looked for an empty table. In a more secluded corner of the main reading room, I found a perfect one, near one of the large arched windows, overlooking a small square where a light rain was now falling a bit more steadily. The drops tapped softly against the thick, old glass, creating a steady, calming soundtrack, a natural rhythm that contrasted with the electronic beats and complex arrangements that usually filled my ears. I sat down in the solid wooden chair, which creaked slightly under my weight, and carefully placed the book on the table's dark, polished surface. I opened the cover with almost childlike reverence. The pages were thick, a yellowed, slightly rough paper to the touch, with that characteristic smell of time and cellulose. The black and white photographs were even more stunning than I could have imagined. Scenes of sleeping European cities in the early century. Empty cobblestone streets under the ghostly light of gas lamps, solitary figures walking in the fog, imposing in silent architecture. The loneliness and poetry of urban life masterfully captured, with a play of light and shadow that took my breath away. It was exactly the kind of visual inspiration I was looking for. Something raw, honest, unfiltered. But, no matter how hard I tried to focus on the impressive images, my mind kept wandering. I kept going back to that narrow aisle, to that moment suspended in time, to your calm smile. Who were you? What brought you to that library on that gray day? Were you a student working on a paper, an artist seeking inspiration like me, an avid reader simply lost among the words? Your calm, your quiet confidence. It was so different from the chaotic and often performative energy that usually surrounded me. You seemed so centered, so comfortable in your own skin, in your own silence. I discreetly lifted my eyes without moving my head, just my gaze, scanning the main hall of the library over the page I pretended to read, and then I saw you again. You were sitting a few tables away, diagonally from me, your back to my position, completely absorbed in a book with a plain cover propped up on the table in front of you. Your shoulders were relaxed, your head tilted slightly to the side, a gesture I found strangely captivating. Even from behind, you radiated that same aura of tranquility and focus I had noticed in the aisle. I watched for a moment, not invasively or like a stalker, but with genuine respectful curiosity. You seemed to belong in that place, in perfect harmony with the silence, the soft light, the surrounding books. There was no impatience, no sign of boredom, just complete immersion. The small smile touched my lips again, hidden by the mask. That encounter had been so pure, so unpretentious, without expectations, without the invisible but almost insurmountable barrier of my public image. It was just one human being helping another with a simple task, and that, at that specific stage of my life, where every interaction seemed loaded with hidden meaning or intent, felt like a small miracle. I thought about the interactions I had daily, the fan encounters, always full of overflowing emotion and energy, but which also demand a certain persona, the business meetings, where every word is weighed, the interviews, where answers need to be carefully calibrated. Everything seemed to have a script, an implicit performance. But there, in that aisle, there was no performance. It was real, simple, direct, human. I flipped through the photography book, but now I saw the images through different eyes, through a new lens. The loneliness captured in the stone streets and dark buildings seemed less sad, more contemplative, almost serene. The beauty hidden in the city's forgotten corners, in architectural details, in the filtered light, seemed to echo the unexpected beauty of that silent encounter. I started to feel a spark of real inspiration, not just from the art contained in the book, but from the human experience I had just had. I thought about how the deepest communication sometimes happens without words, a look, a smile, a gesture. I spent maybe another hour there, perhaps longer. Time seemed to warp in that bubble of calm. I remained immersed in that state of reflective tranquility, something I rarely managed to achieve outside of that place. The rain continued to fall outside, a constant, comforting sound against the glass. Every now and then, I'd lift my eyes and glance discreetly in your direction. You were still there, motionless, in the same position. Lost in your world of words, what story held you so captive? What characters kept you company on that gray afternoon? I wondered if you felt the same peace I felt in that place. Finally, reluctantly, I decided it was time to go. The sun was starting to set outside, though the sky remained overcast, and I had commitments later. The sense of refuge had served its purpose, and the inspiration I sought had come in a totally unexpected way, not just from the book's pages, but from human interaction. I closed the heavy book carefully, feeling its comforting weight in my hands, as if carrying something precious. I got up from the chair, which protested with another soft creak, and instinctively adjusted my cap, preparing to return to the outside world. I put the book in my bag, protecting it. As I passed your table on the way out, I hesitated for a fraction of a second, an almost imperceptible pause in my stride. Should I say something? Another thank you, perhaps? A comment about the weather, but you seemed so focused, so deeply immersed in your reading, so at peace in your private world. To interrupt that, to pull you back from the story that enveloped you, felt almost rude, a desecration of that quiet moment you had created for yourself. And somehow, I felt that our brief, silent encounter had already said everything that needed to be said in that context. Perhaps words would only diminish the purity of that moment. So, I just kept walking, my steps now firmer on the wood, echoing a little louder in the silence as I headed for the exit. I passed the front desk, returned the librarian's nod, and pushed the heavy wooden door open again, stepping out of that sanctuary of silence. The cold, damp street air hit my face, a sensory shock that brought me abruptly back to reality. The city sounds returned in full force. Distant horns, the swish of car tires on wet asphalt, hurried conversations from people passing under colorful umbrellas. The contrast with the library's near absolute silence was stark, but strangely the noise didn't bother me as much as it had before I went in. It was as if I carried a piece of that quietness, that calm, with me, a kind of invisible shield against the external chaos. As I walked back along the wet sidewalk, the book protected inside my bag, feeling its weight against my body, I couldn't stop thinking about you, about your simple, efficient gesture, about your enigmatic, knowing smile. It wasn't a romantic obsession, not some superficial crush. It was something subtler, deeper. It was the feeling of having stumbled upon something authentic, a moment of pure human connection, stripped of all the layers, all the masks that fame and public life tend to impose. It was a reminder that humanity, in its simplest, kindest form, still existed, even for someone like me. That night, and in the days that followed, the memory of that library encounter stayed with me, vivid and clear. Looking at the photography book on my shelf, now an almost sacred object, instantly brought me back to that silent aisle, to that moment suspended in time. It became a talisman, a tangible reminder that even on the most tiring, noisy days, there are pockets of peace, moments of unexpected kindness that can shift your whole perspective, gently anchoring you back to reality. I didn't know if I would ever see you again, honestly. Part of me almost hoped I wouldn't, so that the memory of that single moment would remain untouched, perfect in its uniqueness. But the curiosity lingered, planted like a seed in my mind. Who was the quiet girl from the library who, with a simple gesture and a silent smile, managed to make me feel more seen, and paradoxically, more invisible and normal than I had felt in a long, long time? Today, looking back, through the filter of time and everything that's happened since, that encounter was like the first chord of a melody I didn't yet know, but one that already sounded incredibly beautiful and promising. It was the silent, almost imperceptible beginning of something I couldn't have imagined was coming, and it all started there, in that dusty aisle, with a book on a ridiculously high shelf, and your silent, unexpected help. You might not remember that day with the same clarity I do. Maybe it was just a kind, forgotten act in your routine. But for me, it was the day quietness spoke louder than any song. It was the day silence became significant. It was the day I met you, and I am inexplicably grateful that book was so ridiculously high on that shelf.
Did you enjoy this memory? Subscribe, like, and leave a comment below. Click here to discover more memories.